EP48, Episode 31, Closure in California. Hello, social media mites and mavens. James Homan here. Truth be known, I was feeling a bit foggy. I thought it appropriate, however, that I make an effort to get out of town for the year-end holidays, visit California, and thank the 11 friends who had given so much during Harold's last lap. Some of them I hadn't even met. The fog I was living in during the months immediately following Harold's death was so dense that I couldn't tell you any details related to losing my job that July or falling back into the corps of administrative temps. In retrospect, I did register with 2 agencies and then began temping again as an executive assistant, covering vacations, maternity leaves, wedding plans, etc. Life in these corporate towers provided a much-needed change. This time also allowed me time to deposit the finances Harold had left me with the Shepherd Family Trusts at Solomon Smith Barney, where I was issued a credit/debit card. Foggy blurs can be productive. I was dreading the approaching end-of-year holidays and began to map out a possible escape from the city for 2 or 3 months. I felt as if I was slowly spiraling upward from a great trauma. However, as the holiday season approached, my anxieties were increasing, and I recognized that I was spiraling downward. I did not want to spend Christmas and New Year's Eve alone in our apartment. Dear friends Gina and Alan had a great suggestion: a trip to California for the holidays. This would become a closure exercise for me, giving me the opportunity to express thanks to many people for their constant support. It was also important for me to assure them that while they may not have been able to get physically to New York City, they were truly with Harold on his final journey. Their metaphysical presence had been enormously appreciated. My journey was as rewarding as I'd hoped it would be. I flew to San Francisco and rented the first of 3 rental cars. I actually drove 5,500 miles alone through the state of California, from the city by the bay to Chico and up to Klamath Falls, down through Los Angeles to San Diego, and then returned to San Francisco to fly home a month later. I swerved along the coastal highways, enjoying the ocean air. I careened the snowy Sierras and enjoyed seeing my first geysers, as well as a herd of Roosevelt sheep that temporarily blocked my path. I sang along with my favorite CDs of Nancy Lamott, and I cried a lot. New York friends, Gina Greer and Alan Farnham, had planned to visit Alan's parents in Sausalito, California for the holidays that year. They graciously invited me to crash on the sofa for a few days. Christmas Eve was spent at Grace Cathedral with all the Farnhams, and a few days later they treated me to my first mud bath in Calistoga, California. I also enjoyed the hospitality of a new friend, Peter Minton, whom I had met through Sally and Tricia. Peter treated me to a tour of San Francisco in the back of his 1939 Rolls-Royce. It was quite memorable. I also visited with that childhood friend with whom I'd fallen in love at Boy Scout camp, Dakota, Paul Yandre, and his spouse, Jeff Teague. I hadn't seen Paul since high school. Paul and Jeff graciously entertained me with visits to their homes, both in Virginia City, Nevada, and Healdsburg, California. In Los Angeles, I met Harold's college roommates, as well as a school chum from his elementary school days, of whom I'd never met before. They seemed to enjoy the photo album I'd put together specifically for this trip. It was filled with pictures of Harold's memorial service, our pets, our Halloween parties, Harold at the opera, his favorite museums and theater experiences that had been so much a part of his life. I also brought copies of the memorial service program and the details shared by those who spoke so lovingly of him. One of Harold's friends told me that she chose the man she married because he reminded her of Harold John Shepard. Outside of San Diego, I reunited, somewhat surreptitiously, with a former boss who was now in a kind of witness protection program with his newest lady friend and her two daughters. I'd helped John and his new family rent an apartment in our building on West 72nd Street shortly after he hired me to be his executive assistant at KPMG's newest adventure, a quarterly periodical entitled World Business. Since John had given Harold and me some of his winter clothes before he'd left, I assumed that they'd relocated to warmer climes. Unsure if they were actually in California, on a whim I had mailed my itinerary to him at an address in Columbus, Ohio, asking if, in fact, he even received this letter, would it be possible to meet with him. I had hoped he would reply via email, and he did. We met in the parking lot of a Home Depot in San Diego. He was the final person on my list with whom to reconnect. A brief but meaningful reunion indeed. Driving the coastal length of that beautiful state was an experience as unforgettable as my last 14 months with Mr. Bear. All these bittersweet experiences were certainly cathartic for me. I hoped it brought a sense of closure to those friends who weren't able to visit Harold for a last time. As I flew home the end of February, my emotions ranged from manic happiness to depressive loss. Regaining a balance was challenging. Returning to New York, the apartment seemed more welcoming than ever, with Central Park as splendiferously as it usually is in the spring. I also needed to reconnect with Beanie, who had been taken care of by Uncle George in Soho. Would she even remember me? Friends began calling, and dates were made for dinner. I was catching up on the many months during which my attention had been focused exclusively on Harold. I would now begin my life alone, regroup, refocus, reconnect. Fortunately, although not permanently employed, I was more financially secure than I'd ever been, a situation that reduced the familial anxieties of my early days in living in the city, hand to mouth. With my Solomon Smith Barney credit card, I found that I returned home in February to a financial balance that was almost identical to the balance of November 30th, the previous year. It was wonderful to think that indeed Santa had received my letter. I thought I had done the best I could do, but was left with the feeling that regardless of how well I may have handled the challenges of Harold's last 14 months, the outcome had not been changed. Harold was gone, and I needed to move on. And that concludes this podcast. Please check in next week for episode 32. My next chapter begins in Tuscany. As always, thank you for your time and interest. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance while embracing similarities and respecting differences.